Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. It's that time of year again. And it's been that time of year again for a few months now. And over that time of year, we hear all sorts of records on the radio or in shops or anywhere to remind us of an event that's coming up that bears little resemblance to what it purports to be about. Now, on the TV, there are lots of Christmas movies as well that again talk about anything but the event, but at things surrounding this time of year. For many people, it's a great time of sadness, and these films reflect that people have lost loved ones and they're trying to find love or whatever it might be, try and repair relationships. All this seems to be around about Christmas time. There's even shoot 'em up movies where baddies and goodies are shooting at each other and trying to save the world or whatever it might be, and all because there's a Merry Christmas in there, it qualifies to be a Christmas movie. So I haven't got time for a lot of them, but there's some films, very few, that I actually quite like the story of. One of them is It's a Wonderful Life, starring James Stewart. This, of course, is a very old film. It's older than I am, which is really quite old indeed nowadays. It was probably made in black and white at first, but I understand you can get copies that are now in colour. They'll do all sorts of things to try and perpetuate the sale of these things, and who can blame them? But my understanding, and I stand to be corrected on this, is that the film itself didn't do a great deal at the box office when it first came out. It's a film that came and went and was kind of forgotten about. So the director, or whoever needed to do it, forgot to renew the copyright, meaning anyone could show it and they didn't have to pay any fees for doing so. So the TV companies apparently latched on to this, and there were some who played this over and over and over again because it was free to do so. And because of this great exposure and people showing the film over again and people seeing it and it not costing a thing, someone cottoned on to, we're missing a trick here. And so the copyright issue, I think, was rectified. But by then, lots of people had seen it and it had become popular as a result. Now, the basic premise is that a man feels trapped in his small town. Anybody else feel like that? There must be something better than this. There's a big wide world out there, and why am I not out enjoying it? And he was going to travel and see the world. But just as he was getting ready to go, after many attempts to do so, his father suffered a stroke. And he was the head of a bank, their own bank. And so the son felt he had to remain and sort out the family firm's affairs. Problems ensued with people getting into trouble and him trying to help them, and not really being a ruthless businessman. He didn't really manage to conduct business in a way that made the bank profitable. And eventually he was actually ready to take his own life. Things had become so desperate. Remember, I told you this is a happy Christmas film. This is what Christmas films are all about, death and despair. But prayers were offered for this particular gentleman, and these prayers reached heaven, and an angel who had not earned his wings was sent down to earth to help this man and earn his wings. The angel's name was Clarence, of course. You won't read about him in the Bible, but I'm sure he was numbered with the hosts. And he showed this man what his life would have been like if he had not been born. He had saved his little brother's life, becoming deaf in one ear in the process. They were sledging, and his little brother, the sledge went onto a pond, and the ice broke, and he dived in and brought him out. But the ice cold water, or the process of what he did, meant his ear was ruined. This then meant when he wanted to join the army, which would be a way of getting out of that small town and seeing the world, he wasn't able to do it because of these health reasons. He couldn't go into the army with having this particular problem. George is his name, and he went to get a job with a chemist as a boy as well. The chemist, who had various troubles going on and so drank to help alleviate those troubles, one day was giving the wrong medicine to a lady for her husband, which was poison. The boy knew that George knew that this was happening, and so insisted that the man stop, even though the chemist was very angry with him. but having seen what had happened, he'd saved someone's life again. A boy would have had poison instead of medicine. So the repercussions had also been avoided for that chemist at that time. So then, when he was the manager of the bank, because his dad was ill, he helped people who were having trouble paying their mortgage and paying their rent, who needed money for food and fuel, and he was allowing them to pay back later at a reduced interest. But so many people needed help, he couldn't sustain it. Now all this is shown to him at the end. And by the end of the film, when people got to know that George was in trouble, they rallied around. They had a collection. They saved the bank from another wicked bank owner who was trying to take it over, who was going to foreclose on it. If this man hadn't have been born, the world would have been a worse place. All those people had benefited, and then when he needed the help, Clarence the angel arranged it that help came along. So this is replayed to him. We see through the film these scenes of things happening until at the end he realised that maybe his life hadn't been such a waste after all, because he helped right where he was. He didn't need to go somewhere else in order to be something or do something. So the question is not necessarily about us and what if we hadn't been born, although that might be quite interesting and quite useful. I want to ask, what if Jesus had never been born? You know, there's a lot of discussion these days as far as whether Christians should celebrate the birth of Christ. Well, of course we should. It is part of the story. So many prophecies were fulfilled at Christ's birth and his life, and especially at his death, burial and resurrection. We should celebrate that God clothed himself with human flesh and came to save us. Now that's not to say necessarily that we go along with all of the commercial aspects of this particular time of year, but let's not ignore the fact that we would be in a terrible state if Jesus of Nazareth had never been born. How much worse a place would this world be if we were still living in anticipation of someone coming to save us from all the wrong that was in the world? How would the world look? How would you feel about what was going on about you? Maybe we do feel a little bit in despair anyway because of the way the world is. But Christianity wouldn't exist. There would be no worship services really to go to in the way that we do. All there would be, where religion is concerned, are pale imitations that people have made up in their minds about the great whoever that they should worship. There would still perhaps be the law of Moses and the Ten Commandments and the sacrifices and all that goes along with it, and the pagan practices that surrounded those things as well. The world would be a very different place if Jesus had not been born. We'd all be waiting. I mean, if we had any regard for the scriptures, we can't call them the Old Testament, because if Jesus wasn't born, there wouldn't be a New Testament yet. The old will still be in force. We're still waiting for Jesus or the promised Messiah to appear, and we'd be wondering if it was ever going to happen. Between the last writings of the Old Testament, or the last events that were recorded and prophecies given in the Old Testament, and the first of the New, when Jesus was born, around 400 years had passed. And people were wondering, will it ever happen? It didn't happen in so many people's lifetime. And so folks were still waiting. What if he hadn't come yet? What if science was putting out what it is now about evolution and the Big Bang? How could those things be answered if Jesus had not come and proved that there is a God in heaven? Our biggest defence is that Jesus lives. The evidence is overwhelming. Historical evidence, archaeological evidence, the fact that everything took place in a geographical location. It's overwhelming for those who wish to look that Jesus of Nazareth, as we know him, from a worldly sense, existed. And I think also there is overwhelming evidence for his resurrection. But what argument would we use against science and these other ideas if Jesus hadn't come along to show us who God is and what God is like? There is no doubt in my mind that Jesus was born. It's a fact of history. Even when you write the date, it speaks of the time that Christ was born. We don't count our years from Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was, as many people thought of him, the saviour of the modern world, who stood up against Hitler when all other people didn't. And he stuck with it until others caught on and that evil was destroyed. Although wars still do go on and dictators still dictate. But we don't say, right, let's start counting the years from when Winston Churchill was alive. Why not? He was a man just like us. He was a politician. He was someone with human frailties and weaknesses. But there's something different about Jesus. I mean, look at the Caesars who were in power at the time of Jesus. Why have we not dated our years till now from the time of Augustus or Julius Caesar or any of the Caesars who proclaimed themselves to be God? Why didn't they say, well, now we're going to start counting from the time I arrived on the scene? It wasn't done with any other person but Jesus. Jesus was not only born, but he was born with a purpose. That purpose was to give his life, to save us from our sin and give us new life. So if you are following Jesus, what difference has Jesus made to you? What difference is in your life that makes life worth living, or more bearable at least? Jesus came for those who are less than perfect, those who are far from perfect, and those who are anything but perfect. We're told by Paul in 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 21, God made Jesus, who had no sin, to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. You could be like Matthew, the tax collector, who was going about his daily business, working for the oppressors. Remember, the tax collectors were hated because they worked for the enemy at that time, the enemy of his own people, and he made good money out of it. But he understood who Jesus was, and he relinquished his old life, and he transformed from his past into someone new. And all Jesus said to him was, follow me. He had been taught from an early age, no doubt, about the Messiah who was to come, and when he met him, he recognised him and gave up everything to follow him. Now you could be like that, or you could be like the Pharisees of the day and the teachers of the law, with their stiff upper lip, their narrow mindset and their false sense of importance. You can be like the woman at the well, who, if she was around today, would be a prime candidate for one of these daytime TV shows where they discuss the lives of people who are failing in their relationships and making entertainment out of it. But instead she was shown kindness. Not only did she start to follow Jesus, she went and told the whole town about the one who knew everything about her and yet still loved her. Your life could be turned around like Zacchaeus, or you could be like Pilate and wash your hands of him. You could be like the woman caught in adultery, or the prostitute who understood who Jesus is and what he was offering, or like Pilate, wash your hands of him. Look at all these characters. Look at the difference that was made, and look at Pilate, who could find no fault in him, but for political expediency washed his hands of him. Make no mistake, you can know that you are saved by being obedient to the words of Jesus. You're not saved by joining a congregation. You're not saved by a prayer of faith. You're not saved by being sprinkled. You are saved by having a complete change of heart, that you will live by and be obedient to the teachings of Jesus in the Bible, because through them you're reconciled to God. So you believe that Jesus is the Son of God. You have a change of heart. The word that the Bible uses is repent, but it's basically a change of heart leading to a change of direction in your life. You'll confess with your own mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you'll be immersed in water. Lots of it. That's what being immersed means. Because you are signifying that you are dying to your old way of life. You are leaving it behind. And you're being raised up out of those waters to be born again. How great to have a rebirth. To be able to start again. And your life can become significant and worth living. Where there was no hope, you now have hope. If you didn't have peace in your life, you can now have peace. When we take our eyes off Jesus Christ, we get bogged down with life and we ask, is it worth it? That's nothing new. The Bible deals with it. In Hebrews chapter 12 and the first 3 verses, where the writer is talking about those who were still hanging on to their old way of life under Judaism, trying to keep to the 10 Commandments, and telling them that that had its purpose, that was teaching us what God is like, but things are different now. You don't have to go through these external rituals. You can be in a relationship with Jesus, the Son of God. And he says in this particular passage, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. George, in the film, grew weary and faint-hearted, even though he's a good man doing good things. As Christians, we could get weary and faint-hearted as well. We wonder what's the point when people don't respond and don't reciprocate. But what we need to do is consider Jesus in order to help us keep going, to do those good things, no matter what others do, and no matter what others' responses to us. It is Jesus that helps us run the race. In our Christian walk, we will encounter hardship and hostility. Don't listen to the likes of Joel Osteen and these other so-called TV evangelists, or whatever they call themselves these days, or prosperity preachers, that you follow Jesus and look, you'll get everything like I've got. No, if you're a con man, you'll get all the things that they've got. It'll work just the same as far as earthly wealth is concerned. But as a Christian, it is possible that people will be hostile to you. We must remember that Jesus endured far more than we can ever imagine. And we must use that realisation to strengthen us as we run the race that's set before us, knowing that if we do not grow weary or faint-hearted, that like Jesus, we will receive a joy that is set before us. Paul put it this way in his letter to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 16 and 17. So we do not lose heart. Though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For this slight momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that the hope that can only be found in Jesus? There's another film that I'd like to mention. It's called Saving Private Ryan, and it was became quite well known because of the opening scenes being so horrific and so much like it really is in war. There's nothing glamorous about it at all. But in this film, Saving Private Ryan, a mother's sons were fighting in the war, and she received the death notification of 3 of her 4 sons on the same day. It was discovered by the commander that she had another son still fighting. The army decided to alleviate her pain that this man must be relinquished of fighting any further. He needed to come home and be with his mother. Every other child had been killed in the war. She'd given enough. So Private Ryan needed to be found and brought back home so that she would not lose her last surviving son. The group that went to find him, of all of them, only a few returned. Going to try and find him put them in to battle situations where some lost their lives, a place where there wouldn't have been if they weren't going to find Private Ryan. So at the end of the film we see him as an older man with his wife looking at gravestones, and he asks, was my life worth their sacrifice? Those men who went to save him gave their lives so that he could live, as it were. Christianity is all about someone being sent to save others. Along the way, great sacrifices were given in order to do that. Instead of saving Private Ryan, what about saving Mark Hill? What about saving you? Imagine that. Jesus went through all that he went through so that you could be saved. In Philippians chapter 2, we read about how Jesus was sent on a mission to do that. Philippians 2 says, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but it was for the purpose of giving his life at Calvary. Those who followed him were persecuted. That they witnessed the murder of their loved ones. They were even put to death themselves. The writer to the Hebrews says, this world is not worthy of those people, and surely it isn't. Christ died so that the message of salvation could be made available to all people. Those who committed their lives to spreading that good news put themselves in danger. Then it even continues today. Some parts of the world, Christians are persecuted, imprisoned, put to death, or their lives are made very difficult because of the one they believe in. From lives being taken to physical torture to ridicule by those who think they're wise by the world's standard, and all because Jesus was born in Bethlehem to go to the cross in Calvary to save even them from their sins. Jesus died because you're worth it, as the advert says. Devoted followers of Christ have suffered hardship so that others can hear that message. People have translated the Bible into languages that people can understand and lost their lives because of doing it. Was that a waste of time? Did Jesus waste his time? For all those who have not accepted his sacrifice and taken hold of that salvation, their time on this earth has been wasted. What was it all for? It happened, and then, like a mist, they appeared for a while and went, and now all is lost. Have others suffered in vain so that we can read the Bible in freedom? If you've not accepted the good news about Jesus Christ, then yeah, they've wasted their time. In John chapter 3 verse 19, this is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. At this time of year, certainly in England, it gets dark early, and it doesn't get light very early in the morning either. The world is dark, and at this time of year, people want something to cheer themselves up. In the bleak midwinter, it's nice to have some kind of celebration just to break up the monotony and the awfulness of the darkness and the bad weather. So holiday celebrations, seasonal celebrations, Christmas has took on something that maybe we don't recognise as something that really is a biblical event to celebrate in that way. But let it not put us off from the fact that Jesus was born in Bethlehem and went to the cross at Calvary because he felt that your life was worth it. Now, if he feels your life is worth it, you need to think that way as well. Having become a follower of Jesus and a disciple of Christ, make your life count by telling at least one other person. and having told at least one other person about him, go and tell someone else, because not everyone's going to accept it. But let the message spread, that people's lives are worthwhile because Jesus says so by the sacrifice that he gave on our behalf. So you've got a choice, light or darkness. Whichever one you choose will make the sacrifice of Jesus Christ and those who faithfully passed on the good news, no matter what, worth it. Has your life made their sacrifice worth it? Are you taking hold of the wonderful life, the abundant life that is found in Christ? If so, who are you telling about it?